Welcome to the Level Up Business Podcast. I am J.R. Lay, and joining me today is Dr. Bobby Lowe, who is the author of the new book, Wiring Intelligence, From Reactive to Proactive, 8 Mindsets to Control Performance Under Pressure. And I met Dr. Bobby a couple of weeks ago at an event in California, Elevated, and he was doing the keynote, and walked up, we talked after dinner. He was there on a date with his wife, and I said, listen, I know you're on a date. By the way, 5 kids, right, Dr. Bobby?
5 kids. Yeah, small
5
army.
Kids. Small army. And I was saying with my 4, we're playing 2-on-2. They're running a zone defense in the house with their kids. But what Dr. Bobby was sharing, I thought would be important for everyone, you who watches and listens to this podcast, because I do believe that mastering the mind and mastering the mouth are 2 of the most important technologies that we can master as entrepreneurs, even more so, particularly, I think, in the age of AI. So, Dr. Bobby, welcome to the show, buddy.
Yeah, happy to be here, JR. It was fun to meet you a few weeks ago in California, and then fun to collaborate here on your show.
Well, I would say, before we get too far into the book, what is good in your world? What is positive to get started off with? Give me some good news.
I'll start here. I've been in the field of mental performance training, probably, going on 20 years. And it started as a player. I started as an athlete, and then I studied it. And then, I earned a PhD in human performance psychology. And now I've been a practitioner for a long time. And, when you ask the question, what's good? I was thinking about this literally as I was driving into work today. Like, I have the best job in the world. I get to come back to my alma mater. I get to be at BYU. This is where I was an athlete, and I get to help them train their mind so that they can unlock their best skills and best performance out on the track, out on the field, out on the basketball court, and that's a lot of fun for me. I get to apply, the skills and the research that we study, and then share that with the players. And then they get to go out and have these amazing experiences, right? I literally about 20 minutes ago had a distance runner walk into my office, and like, he just had this glow on his face. He's like, hey, I don't have a lot of time to chat, but remember when we were talking last week about having a bad practice and then how that doesn't have to affect a great performance? And he's like, that's what happened to me last week. I had a bad performance, and then I went out there and ran the 8th fastest time in the country, which was a 3-second lifetime PR for him, right? So that's like a big moment for a kid, and some of our listeners, and we may not think that's a big deal, but for an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, like, that's monumental for them, right?
Well, and so, I think you're right. It's like, entrepreneurs are listening to this, but the way that I look at like entrepreneurship, you're kind of like a business athlete.
I love that term. I use the word corporate athlete all the time.
Okay. Well, it's so funny because my wife and I will be out and about, and people will come up to us and, are you personal trainers? I'm like, no, I'm just a business athlete. And they're like, what is that? And I was like, I'm an entrepreneur, but I master my body so that I can master my mind, is what I tell them. I mean, even over the Christmas break, we were at HEB. It's a grocery store down here in Texas. And we're walking down, I think it was like the cereal aisle or something like that. And this guy stops me and he goes, excuse me. I said, yeah, he's probably, I don't know, his mid-50s, early 60s. He goes, what do I have to do to look like you? And I was whoa. Cause I don't know, maybe I was just exuding something that day that caused him to stop and ask. So you mentioned your experience, and I want to open that up in just a minute, but for people who have written a book, I always, as a fellow author myself with a couple of books behind me, working on my 3rd, and now working with other entrepreneurs to help them publish books through podcast conversations, because I think a lot of it is mental, and that's one of the reasons I think that we have found the quote-unquote hack to help get wisdom out into the world so that they don't have to sit down and pound the keyboard and write. They can just talk and bring that into existence. as an author yourself, why write the book in the first place, and why now?
Yeah. So two answers. Number one, it was actually for me. It was more for me. There's something, call it purifying, when you just sit down and you have to organize your own mind. So going through kind of all of the research around sports psychology and all of the concepts around mental performance or human performance, I really felt like a lot of it was kind of fragmented. You have some skills over here and you have some techniques over here, but I haven't quite found the book that really just organizes it all in a structured framework, in a very methodical way. And so for me, it was an exercise in, okay, how do I go and organize my own mind, and how do I put it into words to then be able to give to somebody, right? And then the second piece is that be able to give it to somebody, right? I get a lot of players that I meet with, a lot of professional athletes. We do a lot of work at the highest level of business and sport. And I kind of have wanted to have something that I can just say, like, here's everything I know, right?
Yeah.
Here's all of it written down, from the neuroscience, from the best research on human motivation, from all the practical applications that we have for applying the mental skills and the mental strengths. Like, here's everything, right?
Yeah.
And if we don't meet again, or if our paths don't cross, like, here, take this, go read it, apply it. And so those were the two reasons: one, to help me organize my own mind, and then two, to have something to just be able to give to players and executives, and not just a book with words on it. Like, I tell my own stories in there, and I use sport example. And to be quite honest with you, JR, like, I was a struggling collegiate athlete. Like, I was doing all the physical stuff. I was in the weight room. I was on the track. My sport was the pole vault. So I was already, missing a few nuts and bolts upstairs. But I was struggling. I would go and I would perform, and I felt like my mind would just get hijacked by my emotions, by my thoughts, by distractions. And then my performance would be just terrible.
Yeah.
It even got to the point where my coach was like, "Hey, you need to start making bars. You need to start competing and performing well, or I can't travel you. I can't take you to these competitions." And so it was through studying the mind and studying these skills that like unlocked all of my physical abilities. And I had a pretty transformational athletic career. And so because that happened to me, this is kind of a way for me to pay it forward a little bit. Like, here, let me take everything that I know, everything I have, give it to you, let it unlock you.
Well, I just want to pause on that point for a minute, because your past experience, and I think when we think about the past, that can be one of three things. The past can be an anchor. It keeps us stuck. It can be an asset that we build upon in the present moment, or the past can be an accelerant that really leaps us forward into the future. And I want to come back to the why. You said you did it for yourself to organize, but if I think about working with and having talked to, at this point, hundreds of other entrepreneurs that have been down a very similar journey, you use the word organizing. I might use the word clarifying.
Sure.
Because, and you clarify through the organizing, but the other aspect of that is like, here's everything I know, and now it's about impact, because it's just one of you. And I was in your same situation, because in 2012, I was told, if you want to make a bigger impact as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to write a book. And at that point, I was about 10 years into my entrepreneurial journey, and I laughed. I laughed at the advisor. I was like, and then it was like, oh, and it was truly, in hindsight, it was all mine. Like, what do I know? Who's going to read my book? I'm not that different. But it was like all of this negative self-talk, all this limiting belief. And then I'm like, wait a minute. Very similar to you took your experiences to now help others. So it's like you've walked a journey, and now you can help guide others along. It's kind of like, I don't know, is Star Wars a fair reference for you? Can we use Star Wars as a reference point?
Yeah. How young do I look?
Well, no, it's not that. It's just sometimes I use a lot of Star Wars references because it had a big influence on my own.
I love Star Wars.
All right. So I think what you're talking to is what we saw in the greater Star Wars arc narrative, to where Obi-Wan trained Luke. Luke then became the new Obi-Wan training Rey. And that's kind of the
Right.
same thing that authorship will do, which I want to come back to your story, because we can't gloss over. You opened the book with your own personal narrative. U.S. track and field championships, and the mind game that unlocked your skills. Take us back, because you were just starting to go there with your coach. Like, your coach was like, I can't travel you, but then you found something that helped you unlock a whole new, maybe capability. I don't know if that's the right word. Ability.
I think skills and ability is absolutely the correct word there, because I'm a big believer that the mind, you're not, our thoughts are not random, our emotions are not uncontrolled. Like, they become that way just because we become a product of our own repeated patterns throughout life, right? Like,
Mhm.
your brain sees patterns, it sees habits, wires them, and then it automates them, right? And so, and so, if something feels random or uncontrolled, it's actually probably just because there's an automated pattern in there that was created over time, right?
Which I think
I
is important to pause on this. You brought this up out in California, those patterns, and it was funny as you were, and I forgot who it was someone in the front, and they were also, to use your words, a neuroscience nerd,
Yeah,
as I was. I just didn't raise my hand because I referenced some of this in my second book. It's like, when we talk about these patterns, we have thousands of thoughts, and I think you reference, it could be anywhere between 40 to 60,000, maybe 30,000. Let's just say you have a
it's a
lot of
lot.
thoughts running through your head every single day. 90% of those repeat. 80% of them are negative. And so there's that habit, and then also too, and maybe you could comment to this, it's like 95% of our behavior runs at a subconscious level that we're not even consciously aware
Yeah,
of.
yeah, and some of that's the autonomic nervous system, pumping the heart and moving the lungs. But then some of it is these automatic patterns we build. And I think I shared the example of, like, have you ever driven from your work or like the gym back to your house, and you got all the way to your house and you don't remember anything in between? Like, you got there and you're like, how did I get here?
How did I get here? Yeah.
But that's just the autopilot, like, turning on, right?
Or
The
maybe, or
brain is,
maybe I'm just going to pause for a second. There might be someone who's watching or listening to this, and this is not hyperbole. Like, I would just want to just maybe call this up a little bit. You might be at this point in your life. How did I get here? Because maybe you haven't taken time to pause and reflect on what that journey was up to this point. And I think maybe that's what going through this book writing experience was for you. It was organizing, and it was clarifying. So it allowed you to perhaps match patterns that you hadn't matched before, or maybe not pattern matching. Maybe it was perspective through that experience, and connect some dots.
yeah. Well, and let me build on that and go back to answer the question you asked earlier about like skills and abilities, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with you. There's a lot of scenarios that I think you could argue that the midlife crisis, right, is like that moment where you sort of sit back and reflect and think, well, how did I get here? And a
Mm.
lot of it's just sort of going through the motions. Like, I took this job over here, but we did it by default rather than by design. And I like those two words, right? And I shared this when we were talking in California. We can go throughout life, and life will help us wire in patterns and habits. It will, like, by default, it will create something in us, right?
Hmm.
But if we're reflective and we spend time really trying to understand and learn who we are, and have self-awareness, we actually can then build the skills and abilities to then design our own life, to engineer it, right? I tell players all the time, you are the narrator of your life. You're not sitting back watching a movie of some things happening. You're the narrator, you're the architect. You get to control that. And so, going back to skills and abilities, I agree with you that the mind, our words and our thoughts, and as we speak them, whether in the mind or externally, that then becomes the tool to then create and build and architect whatever it is you want to architect, right?
All right, I'm beaming from the inside. You use the word architect. I use the word author or authorship, and it's, I think sometimes, and maybe we can come back to your story on reflection here, back in your track and field. It's like, why do we forget that we are the architect, or as I'm writing about in my third book, we are the author of our life? Because you mentioned thoughts and beliefs. And that's one of the things that I believe there are two different narratives here. There's the internal narrative of our identity, our beliefs, our thoughts, and our emotions. And that's the stories that we tell ourselves. But then there's the external narrative of our intentions, our actions that we repeat, which become our habits that lead to the outcomes. That's the external narrative. That's how we show up to the world. I want to come back to your story, though, because you talk about that moment and going from Alaska to Missouri and the whole purpose of the book to begin with in the first place. And then I want to go from there into a point that might not be, it might be misunderstood around performance. So let's just reconnect this back to bridge the gap of your story and narrative to get to this point here.
Yeah. So in the book, I start out by really taking one of the most embarrassing moments that I've ever had. And unfortunately, it happened on the biggest stage. I compare it a lot to, a field goal kicker, going to kick the game-winning field goal and not just missing the field goal, but like whiffing the ball, right? Like you go to kick the ball and you miss the ball. Like that's how easy of a skill it was for me to supposed to execute in that moment, right? So for the listeners, I was at the USA Championship. It was my first US Championship. I'm standing next to 2000 Olympic gold medalist, 2004 Olympic gold medalist, 2008 Olympic bronze medalist. I mean, these are like guys I had posters of on my wall as a kid growing up, right? And I'm in the mix with them, and that in and of itself was like a huge achievement or accomplishment for me, right? But I'm running down the runway and I plant the pole, and we've watched all those like pole vault fail videos online. I definitely was one of those, right? Like I think I'm going into the pit. Next thing I know, I'm flying out over the concrete, and I crash. 5,000 people, everybody, goes deathly silent because they thought I had just died, right? But
I'm glad you did it. You're here to tell the story.
Me too. I'm glad I didn't either, right? But trainers rushed out and people huddled me. They helped me up, and I ended up being okay and ended up being able to finish the competition. But I start with that story only to illustrate that there are these thoughts and patterns that can interfere with our performance. Even the best athletes in the world have these moments where their performance gets hijacked, their performance gets distracted or derailed, right? And so I start with that story only to illustrate that happened to me competing at a high level, and then from there I start to build. Okay, here's how you prepare and build the mind so that you can avoid those moments, right? So that you can not so much avoid them as much as control them under pressure. Like you can control the mind under pressure and have better moments and better experiences, right?
So I want to pause on this point just a bit. And I'm just going to ask the question because I'm curious. Is that video out online by any chance?
It's not.
Okay.
That one is not out there.
The reason I ask is because the way that you frame that is you took one of the most embarrassing moments of your life and have been able to integrate that into just your own story. It's your own narrative. And you're able to talk about it and laugh about it. And I'm curious, it's like, because to me, that's like where some of the deepest wisdom comes from. It's in that valley of despair. And it's where failure can become fuel, because that then something happened. It did become fuel for you in one way, shape, form, or fashion. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. But you mentioned this just briefly, was performance. And that's the whole point of chapter 1. I'm curious, what and how do you define in the book high performance?
Yeah, and the way I write in that, I mean, it's super easy to say high performance and then immediately go to like in the business or corporate world, it's like, okay, it's all these, business juggernauts, like they're high performing. Um, or it's in the sport world, right? It's the Tiger Woods and the Serena Williams and the Michael Phelps, and we could make a list a mile long. And because they performed well in these moments, we oftentimes, and I'll say mistakenly, label that as high performance, right? And so I kind of go in to sort of counter argue high performance isn't just winning, it isn't the achievements as much as it is executing your skills and abilities under pressure in the biggest moments, right? And you don't necessarily have to be a titan of business or a titan of industry to be able to execute your best skills, your strengths and abilities in some of the biggest moments of your own life, right? And that could
Yeah.
be on as an entrepreneur, that could be as an athlete, that could be as a parent, a father, a dad, a mother, right? And so the way I define high performance really isn't necessarily high performance as much as it is human performance, but it's the ability to use your mind to unlock all of your best skills and talents and abilities to then perform and execute your best
Yes. Well,
in any moment.
I want to come back to your narrative now, because you plant the pole, you end up sprawled out, 5,000 people. And it's like, this is where literally, and I've shared this to other entrepreneurs, like, this is where your mess can become a message that inspires other. This is where your greatest test can become a testimony that gives hope to people. This is where literally your pain can become a platform that helps elevate others. I mean, like, you're living what I share. So bring us back to that moment. What happens next? Like, how do you get up and move forward to keep making progress, just on not maybe just with just your life's journey at that point? Because I don't know what was going through your mind after that.
Yeah, and I'll share the two like pesky. I'll share the one pesky thought that distracted me, and then kind of the strategy to rebound in that moment. So as I'm picking myself up, I chat with my coach. He gives me a couple of technical adjustments, right? And I still remember today. I'm carrying my pole and I'm walking across the track back to my where my bag and my shoes are, and I have this thought, and the thought is, don't embarrass yourself. And I remember that has kind of shown up a few times as I was warming up, as I was getting ready. And it seems like a harmless thought, right? It seems pretty insignificant, but the uh, the reason that comes into play is your brain is really objective.
Yes.
It doesn't understand, the do's and the don'ts, and it doesn't understand what's helpful or harmful. It really just it's like a computer program. It just executes what the mind tells it to execute. And so in that moment, I remember thinking just before I picked up my pole to go and plant it, like, just don't embarrass yourself, right? Like, and for the life of me, I just wanted to belong, right? I'm standing next to these Olympians and these great athletes, and I just wanted to belong, right?
Right.
And so, but I have this thought, and sure enough, like, my body, my brain and body connected, and they just executed that exact thing, right? Like, the most embarrassing thing could happen. And then but from there, right, luckily I had done, at this point, I had done 4 or 5 years of like really good mental work with a friend and a mentor of mine, and actually he's a colleague of mine now, and that's Dr. Craig Manning.
Mhm.
But he helped me sort of build the mental tools and the mental strengths to then like reset in that moment. And so I remember going back to my performance statements and my focus cues, and I got redialed in, and then had some successful jumps. And I ended up going and having a pretty good competition. I finished 10th, which to me, like, I'm walking away going, awesome. In these Olympians, like, I'm the 10th best jumper in the US, for that short moment right there, right? And so, but like, you asked the question, like, how did we get there? That was a moment for me, but actually it was all the experiences leading up to that. And there's 5 years of like, failure, success, failure, success, which you and I both know, like that's the pattern of growth, right?
Right.
And it's essential for growth, right? So throughout the whole book, I kind of tell these stories, failure, success, and but they're attributed to, or they're told in the context of what mental strength is, right? So this is what confidence is. This is what focus is. This is what motivation is. This is what decision making and anxiety, and this is what grit and resilience are, right? And so I kind of use those experience, apply the research, and tie it all together. But like I didn't just get there, and that wasn't just one moment for me. It was sort of, that might have been one of the more pinnacle moments, but it was kind of built over time.
Hey, it's JR, and I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for tuning into today's conversation. Before we get back to the show, I have a quick question for you. Are you a visionary entrepreneur who wants to elevate your brand and expand your influence to increase your impact? If this is you, you're the reason we're on a mission to amplify the voices of visionary entrepreneurs by unlocking their wisdom, sharing their stories, and publishing their books. So, when you are ready to level up your business and your life, send me a text to 832-240-1922. That's because I want to teach you how to amplify your voice so that your mission and message are seen, known, and heard by those who need your help the most. Now, let's get back to the conversation to continue to learn, to grow, to level up together. I appreciate the way that you have framed and perhaps reframed these experiences. Like you said, success, failure. I mean, even success can be reframed as well, because then it becomes a question of what can I do? And I'm going to connect something back. It's like in California, you're talking about, I control my thoughts, I control my words. And there's one word here. It's like, what can I do to be better versus what can I do to be even better? And just simply adding even, because if you're asked the question, and I'm very mindful of this with my own kids, it's like, what could you do better versus what could you do to be even better? I've watched their response with that, because if I ask them, well, what could you do better? It just negated every success that they had in that moment or that experience.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, it demeans the achievement already. Yeah.
Correct. Where then I go, well, what could you do even better next time? I'm honoring the progress that they made. Now it's like, oh, now that's becoming my new baseline. Now I can build from that. And the other thing that you mentioned, well, I'm going to come back. I control my thoughts. I control my words. I can choose to control my thoughts. I can choose to control my words. Why is that so important when we're talking about, coming back to the title of your book, Wiring Intelligence?
Yeah, for me, that's the starting point. I've studied sports psychology, human performance, and if you take the great achievement and you sort of work backwards to that from that great achievement, right? Like Michael Phelps winning 23 or 28 medals or whatever it was, right? Mm-hmm. Like what was the most finite moment or point that led to that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think somewhere in early in the days, he had this idea, right? This set of words, this belief that he could be an Olympic champion and he could be the greatest swimmer of all time. And, and then those words start to build the path or the map to then get there, right? And then you start to go and, peel back the onion of the neuroscience, right? And you actually learn that, yeah, that's sort of the beginning piece. Our thoughts and our words lead to our actions and behaviors. Emotion gets pulled into the equation there. And then that leads to outcomes and results, right? And then actually it becomes cyclical, because then the evidence or the outcomes and results create more thoughts and words, right? Which then continue that pattern along, right? And so once through my research and through a lot of the work, like once you kind of see that pattern, and then you start to learn, well, that's how the mind builds its own muscles, right? Mm-hmm. So we talked about being a personal trainer a little bit earlier, right? Like you get in the gym and you start working out, and if you're doing, the bench press or the, curls, bicep curls, like if you're doing rep after rep, like that's how the muscle gets stronger,
Right.
right? The neurons and the neural pathways in the mind are essentially the mind's version of muscles, right? And so as we repeat these thoughts and repeat these words, those muscles, those neural pathways get stronger, and they turn from, I like to use the analogy of like a blank field, right? They move from a small dirt pathway to then maybe a sidewalk to then maybe a road to then like a super highway of electric communication, right? Which is how the brain works, right?
Correct.
But that communication is just language. It's just words. And
Yes.
so that's why when you break it down to sort of its finite pieces, it just starts with words.
So your point of belief, and I want to come back to belief in just a moment, because there's a personal perspective on this from a book that we're working on with an entrepreneur. They have passed. This is a legacy book. And so we're interviewing around 20 of their inner circle, because this is being written from their
Yeah,
wife.
cool.
And so we're starting with the inner circle. And what's becoming very clear was this entrepreneur, for context, came to the United States as an immigrant in the 1950s, did not know the language, didn't really even have an education to begin with, learned a trade, went to university, but didn't graduate because he was told that he had to take a foreign language. And he was like, what are you talking about? I've been taking a foreign language the past few years I've been here. And so with just about like $157 in his pocket, moved to the Houston area, started a company, lived out of a garage for 9 months, pretty much ate flour and lard for subsistence, and then he didn't just build a business. He became one of the largest business in the industry in the South area. He was buying from India and shipping to Africa. I mean, it was just wild. And then he got into real estate. And you're like, how? And the pattern that keeps coming up was just his belief. Like one time he was driving to go pick up material from a company, and he told his employee, they're eventually going to buy from me. His words, his belief, saying it out loud. And so I want to come back to these mindsets: belief, motivation, grit, resilience, energy, confidence, focus, decision-making. But before we do that, let's get back to the point of the book, wiring intelligence. There's two, and I love the framing on this: reactive intelligence versus proactive intelligence. What's the difference between the two? And you've touched on the reactive a little bit, maybe even on the proactive, but I want to be even more definitive for those watching and listening so that they can understand where they're operating from. Are they operating from a reactive intelligence, or are they choosing to operate from a proactive intelligence? What's the difference here?
Yeah, and actually let's pull up a statistic that we talked about a little bit earlier, right? We talked about how, we have tens of thousands of thoughts that go through our mind every day. 90% of them are repeated from the day before. 80% of them are lean negative, right? Mm-hmm. So that tells us two things. One, the brain is just mapping patterns and habits. Like it's looking for habits to automate, right? Because it wants to be an efficiency machine. I say like the brain is a lazy machine. Like it's looking to automate things so that it can just conserve energy and move quickly, right? So we know that that's one truth. The second truth there, it leans negative because it was built for survival. It wasn't built for success. It wasn't built for thriving, right? It was more worried about saber-toothed tigers than it was, building a secure, flourishing life, right? And so because of those two things, if we're passively or unintentionally just moving through life, moving through from event to event to event, like we're going to create patterns that they're going to get wired in as habits, but they're going to get wired in by default, and they're going to lean negative just because you have that part of your brain in you, right? Mm-hmm. And so I defined that as reactive intelligence. It's sort of these patterns that get built over time based on your reactions to the environment around you, based on, unintentional kind of patterns or unintentional responses to these events, right?
Yeah.
I kind of use the analogy, the road rage analogy, right?
Mm.
Like we didn't learn in a textbook. We didn't uh, find, no parent taught us like, hey, when you're on the freeway and somebody cuts you off, like this is how you respond, right? That moment happens, it surprises us, and then our fight or flight response like takes over, and we get angry, and then we drive past that person and give them a different type of wave through the window, right? But we reacted in that moment, and our emotions fired up, and the limbic system, right, the amygdala kind of takes over and hijacks us. Well, nobody ever taught us that. Nobody ever you didn't read that in a book anywhere. But when it happens once, right, neural pathway gets created. If it happens twice, then it gets strengthened. If it happens over, right, we wire in this pattern, and that goes back to the title of the book, right? You wire in this pattern. So let me just sort of share the alternative to that. If these habits are built reactively,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just words and reactions to events, right, then that means we can build proactive patterns, that we have the abilities to then wire in what I call proactive intelligence, which is basically the proactive piece means to create or to control or to cause, right? That's the definition of proactive. And intelligence is just the application, the ability to acquire skills and abilities and knowledge, and then the ability to apply those skills, abilities, and knowledge, right? So
Yeah.
proactive intelligence is you choosing and controlling to acquire and apply your skills and abilities. To me, that's like the essence of intelligence, right? So we can either build reactive intelligence by just reacting to all the moments around us and letting that fight or flight kind of control us, or we can choose by design to control that and engineer that on our own, right? And in its simplest form, it goes back to what you said, right? Like you're the author of you're not watching some movie happen to you, right? Like you're the author of it. You get to choose
Yeah.
how you respond to all these events.
Well, and I think that idea of react or respond, it's a frame right there. And to your point, the reactive intelligence, you mentioned it, the mind, the brain specifically. I'm going to come back. I actually have a really good question on this because it's something that, like, these are the things that keep me up at night. The brain is an efficiency machine. On the flip side, you have proactive intelligence to where the brain becomes a prediction machine. And what do you mean by the prediction machine?
Yeah, so that's both part of that primitive survival instinct, but it's also just how the brain works, right? It's always scanning the environment. It's always kind of looking just out beyond to predict what's going to happen, right? And that's part of that scanning for threats thing, but it's also a decision-making mechanism in the brain, right? It helps give you information to know what do I do next, right?
Mm.
And when it's trying to create a decision, when it's trying to predict to create a decision, the first place that it looks is stored memory. So it looks into the subconscious, it looks into where all that memory is. And if it can find a familiar pattern, then it says, oh, okay, this is what I do in this situation,
Right.
right? If it can't find a familiar pattern, or it can't find good memory, then it sees uncertainty. It sees an uncertain future. So then it doesn't know what to do. And that's actually the mechanism that then triggers the fight or flight response to then say, oh, Bobby doesn't know what to do. He must be in trouble. Therefore, fight or flight response takes over, hijacks my brain, and starts making decisions for me, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where the prediction piece comes into play.
Well, you use the word, I think it was with proactive intelligence, the ability to create or to write, to author, to architect. We'll come back to your frame on that before. And I think like that is where like the idea, as I was mentioning, is it's like the mind is like the most important quote unquote technology. And sometimes I don't know, whenever I am doing workshops, I think I lose people on that. Like your mind is tech, and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, like, and this is what I want to get your take on, because your brain is like the biological computer.
Yeah.
The mind is the software, and if you want to elevate your life, you're gonna have to elevate your mind. It's kind of hard. It's like almost like running an iOS update on your phone. It's hard to update the hardware, which would be the physical component of the brain. And once again, you have way more perspective than me on this. This is why I'm asking. But you can upgrade the mind through proactive intelligence, through wiring intelligence. Am I completely off on my thinking about this?
No, 100%. Yeah, I like the software versus hardware analogy, right? All the tissue and the fluids, and like that's in the brain. That's the hardware, right? Like we call that the brain. Um, but the mind is the software, right? And it's
Mm.
you could think of it as like the code behind the scenes that then
Ah,
tells the phone how to work, right? Tells
and
the hardware how to work.
yes, and you use that word, not code, but encoded, because you're talking about going like words control thoughts, but then memory, that's the encoding. But then there's another element to this, because now you're getting into like coming back to athletics, whether that be on the field, on the court, or perhaps even business athlete in the boardroom. The body, the physical response to this. You mentioned the fight or flight. Um, how how do these 8 mindsets to control performance under pressure? And I know we're getting close to the end, but it's like I know we've talked about belief. I gave you the example of that entrepreneur, and it was just truly the power. I believe the power of his mind, and his grit, and his motivation, his resilience. But there was one point in the book that I wanted to loop back on and get your take. Energy mindset. Let's expand upon that here, because we've talked about energy before on this podcast, and some think it's like woo-woo stuff, and I'm like, no, it's not. What's your take on energy mindset?
Yeah. So if we're using the analogy of like a car, right? Your body is the car, right? It's the vehicle that carries you. The energy mindset really has to do with it's like the gas pedal of that car. And I take three concepts and kind of merge them together. But you have physical energy, which is your fueling, right? You have physical energy, right? You have mental energy, right? Which is a lot of your thoughts and your decisions, like they consume fuel, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
you have emotions, right? In the sports psychology world, we most practitioners lean very, very heavily into that emotional regulation side of things, right? Like they just lean really far into the emotional energy. But there's actually two other pieces. So there's three pieces in there. All of them consume
What are
fuel:
what are the three again? The physical, the emotional, and
physical energy, emotional energy, and mental energy, right?
mental. Uh huh.
And they're consuming fuel, right? And so we fuel the body. We fuel the body with nutrition, recovery, sleep, like doing all the right things that we're supposed to be doing, right? Even relaxation and meditation is a form of fueling, right? Our nutrition, getting good sleep, exercise, right? Going and getting exercise, like you're essentially fueling the body, right? Preparing it to be, to go and perform whatever it has to perform, right? But then there's these things that draw from the fuel, right? You push the gas pedal, it consumes the gasoline, right? It consumes the fuel. Movement consumes a lot. It's physical energy that consumes that fuel. The mental energy, I think I shared this in the keynote. Your mind is like 3% the body weight, but it consumes 25% of the energy. Like
Right.
it's a lot of, like, it's a big energy
And
consuming.
efficiency machine. It's
Yeah. It may not be that efficient. uh, and so that's your mental energy. So think about it in the term from this perspective. Like every decision you make, right, is like stepping on that gas pedal. So people who overthink, overthinking isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that your mind is able to switch between thoughts really, really fast, right? And developing mastery around that is just learning to slow down and then spend more attention on one particular thought, right? But overthinking, right, that's mental energy getting consumed. And so if we're doing that a lot, we end up way more fatigued at the end of the day. And then
Yeah.
the emotional piece that comes into play. That's when our emotions also consume energy as well, right? So what I
Right.
train a lot of players and a lot of athletes on is, the reactive intelligence is going to push us to the extremes on these emotional responses. And so what I mean by this is, if you have an event and your response to that event is, let's say like you just run a lifetime best in the mile, or actually I'll use a pole vault analogy real quick. In the pole vaulting world, there's kind of this unwritten rule. If you go and jump a lifetime best, you're supposed to just stop. And the reason for that is because you have this big moment. You go to the extremes on emotional energy, like you're celebrating and cheering and you're really excited. That moment consumes a ton of energy, right?
Right.
And so then if you decide to jump again at another lifetime best, you've just burned all this energy. So most athletes decide not to go and do that because they actually don't have the physical, mental, and emotional energy to go and execute the next jump safely and
Right.
efficiently and effectively, right? So that's the extreme on the positive side, right?
Yeah.
Call it over celebration, call it too much excitement. On the negative side, it's getting too frustrated or angry, or even seeing those emotional outbursts where your brain kind of gets hijacked by that fight or flight response, right? So you have these two extremes. What I train a lot of athletes to do is stay neutral or slightly skewed positive,
Mm.
and kind of go up and down right in that more neutral zone, rather than skew to the extremes, because the extremes are going to burn that energy. And so what ends up happening is your performance gets impacted because fuel consumption is poor, right? And you've burned a lot of it.
Mm.
And you get distracted by those extreme emotional experiences, right? So that's the energy mindset. And so our job really is to develop control, regulation, and management of physical, mental, and emotional energy altogether.
What you're speaking to on the energy side reminds me of two things. One is the work of Kathy Colby, using the Colby A index, which we have. If you're watching or listening, Audrey, who is our operations lead here, is a certified Colby consultant. So we're able to understand how entrepreneurs naturally solve problems or take action from an energy standpoint, which is extremely helpful when they're going through the methodology to publish a book through a podcast, because they'll exert energy in different manners. So, for example, if someone is like me, an initiated quick start, I get a lot of energy by just showing up and being and creating. Whereas someone who might be an initiating fact finder, and a resistant quick start, is going to gain energy from doing all the fact finding, the research, the dot
Right.
connecting. And so we got to deal with them and guide them differently. But the other thing too, and I wrote about this in Banking on Change, from two different perspectives that you're talking to. One, and it actually relates back to the idea of what you're doing in the sports world. The question is who is on your team? Time, energy, attention, and then money. And because I think a lot of times people incorrectly think about time, because one of the things when we talk about time is, well, how are you spending your time? And I'm like, time is now becoming an investment. It's like, how are you investing your time? Because time can have a major multiplier payoff. Energy is the expenditure, though. Then the question becomes, how are you spending your energy? Because energy is going to be finite. And I really appreciate the way that you framed it through those three different lenses. And then the A is attention. It's like, what are you paying attention to? Because what you pay attention to is going to directly influence how you spend your energy, which is going to directly influence how you invest your time.
Right.
And all that comes down to the M, which is money. It's what's your relationship with money? Because then that just flows back up there. So it becomes who's on your team. But working with entrepreneurs, one of the things that we talk about is, well, what are you going to have to do to get from where you want to be to get to where you want to go? Like, what's going to have to change? And like, many times that's a great question, because they haven't thought about that. They just like, I want to publish the book. And I'm like, well, how are you going to change through this experience? And so I walk them through a 4-step model, and I call it the 4 steps to human transformation. Step one is you begin to see things differently. So you just gain a new perspective, and you opened up with that. Like you were able to organize and clarify your perspective through your own experiences. And when you begin to see different, you begin to think different. It's kind of like when you see a flick flub in the movie, you can't unsee that. Like that's now wired in. And then I asked them, I'm like, are we on the same page? And I'd love to get your take on this. Because when you begin to see different and you think different, what's the third step in that transformational process? Knowing what you know.
Yeah, well, that then becomes the action part, right? Then that becomes the I can go and do the thing, right?
Yeah.
And you and I both know that like two people can look at a scenario and see something totally different, right?
Mm-hmm.
A good example. I don't know if any of our listeners recently saw the Netflix documentary, or the Netflix, actually it was a live stream of Alex Honnold climbing Taipei 101, which is one of the tallest buildings in the world. He free soloed it. That means he climbed to the outside of the building with no ropes, with no safety gear, no net at the bottom. Like he just climbed the building, right? So, but for us, like the casual observer watching that, like we see like all this fear and all this panic, and we're like, how is he even doing that? Like that would be a disaster for me. But for him in the moment, right? To him, it's just, I see the next handhold, and I see the next foothold, and I see the next level, and he just climbs, right? And he doesn't experience the same type of fear. But what he describes in his own words is he does experience fear, but he's been in that moment so many times, right? That his brain has wired in a proactive pattern. Like, here's what I do in this situation. I just move my hand here and move my foot there. That's the action piece, right? So when you talk about seeing something and then what that then translates into, it's what is the next step? And this goes back to the prediction part of the brain. If the brain sees uncertainty, it's going to panic. If the brain sees certainty, then it has the action, it knows what to do, right? So let me tie this into the belief mindset, because I think this is super important. Self-belief, or belief in and of itself, is a principle of action. You can narrow it down to the simplest phrase of I can do a thing, right? And then put whatever action after that. But that belief in and of itself is a principle of action. When Alex Honnold is 15 stories, 30 stories off the ground, right? At half a mile up in the air and hanging off of a cliff, right? He has this belief that he can take the next handhold or foothold, and that becomes the principle of action that moves him, right? If he's up there and he sees fear or he sees uncertainty, his brain's going to panic, his fight or flight response is going to take over, and that could lead to a disastrous outcome.
I think that's a great example with the climbing, and to your point, and this is where I have seen something different, because I would say 98 to 99% of people that I've asked that question to, of they see, they think, and then they act. And you're touching on it with the climbing example. What I have observed working with entrepreneurs and their teams is there's a third step that bridges the thought and the action, and you're touching on it. Like you mentioned fear, but he's done it so much he's able to respond to that. And so to bridge the gap between the thought and the action, it comes down, we'll just call it feeling or emotion. And so to see different, to think different, because how many times, and I'll raise my hand, and when I do my keynotes, I'm like, dude, I'll be the first one to tell you, like, I know there are things in my life that I need to do different. I have the intellect, but I'm failing to take action because I have not had an energetic shift. Like my desire, my feeling, my emotion to take action it's not greater than my desire, feeling, emotion to maintain the status quo. Therefore, I make no change. I continue with what I do, even knowing that what I do is probably not good, that's a whole nother part of when we think about change and change management. It's like, we tend to wait till it hurts to actually take action. Don't be that. Go move into the proactive intelligence that Dr. Bobby's talking about here in wiring intelligence, but it's the feeling becomes the fuel. I don't know if you've read Neville Goddard's work, but he wrote a book a long time ago called Feeling is the Secret. and how that can be a part of just our own transformational journey. So, Dr. Bobby, I really appreciate the perspective and the energy
Yeah.
that you have shared today, the time that you have invested to help others level up and elevate their minds, because I do believe, once again, as we started this conversation, it is one of the most important technologies to master in the age of AI, right alongside the mouth, because it is part of the creative process. It's part of the creative expression. Even the idea of wiring intelligence is something that's why I connected and resonated with it, because when you're talking about the reactive intelligence and the proactive intelligence, I mean, artificial intelligence is a big topic, which I think it's important. But for me personally, I'm more interested in the authentic intelligence of the human experience and how that then connects and is inspired by the infinite intelligence of the creator of God, the universe, however you want to frame that. So your authentic intelligence has gone, and your past experiences are going to be a platform, I know, to help others level up and elevate in ways that we can't even perceive and we might not ever know. But that's the beauty of this entire journey. So thank you so much, Dr. Bobby.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, JR. It's been an amazing conversation, super fun. But like you, I'm on a bit of a mission to just help people level up, help people, you know, find the skills and the abilities to unlock their internal physical skills and abilities, and just be their best selves, right? So I think we're very aligned in both our passion and pursuit of that to help other people. And so this has been a great conversation. Appreciate you for having me on.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I always like to send someone off with some sort of action, and first and foremost, a gratitude, because if you got to this part of our conversation, thank you for investing your time and spending your energy and paying attention with myself and with Dr. Bobby. What is the one thing for those that made it to this part of the conversation that they can do next on their journey to wiring their intelligence?
Yeah. I'm selfishly like, go buy the book, right? It is a framework and a roadmap of how to engineer all this, how to build all this. But more than like, what is the next step? I would want to leave your listeners with this, and I said this in the keynote, but it's just this powerful truth. You can choose and control your own thoughts and your own words. You're not a prisoner to random thoughts or random emotions, right? You can control that and create that and build that, and that can then lead to a more flourishing success as defined by your own terms of success, right, as your own definitions. But it can lead to a happier, flourishing, more fulfilling life, instead of just kind of being pushed here and there and reacting to to external factors around you, right? And so my encouragement, or my last parting piece of wisdom, if you can even say that, right, it would just be the knowledge and understanding that I control my own words and my own thoughts, and that in turn leads to the ability to control my emotions, which then leads to the ability to control behavior and outcomes, right? And once we have that belief, like you talked about the entrepreneurs, we talked about the great climbers, we talked about these great athletes, right? Once we have that belief, then we can start to move in the direction proactively the way we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be kind of my parting thought.
I really appreciate that. Please don't forget that you are, and I'll use Dr. Bobby, your analogy, that you're the architect of your life, that you're the author of your life, and the impact that you can make when you remember that is beyond of what we can perceive today. And I know that, Dr. Bobby, you are going to make a massive impact. So thank you. And yes, get the book. We'll wrap up on that. Where can someone who is watching and listening, where can they go grab Wiring Intelligence?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. So just go search Wiring Intelligence on Amazon. You can get your Kindle version or your ebook version there. I'm working on the Audible version. So for those that are listeners, right, we have that coming soon. So that's probably the best place to find it right now.
Go get the book, and remember, you can control your thoughts. You can control your words. Thank you, Dr. Bobby.
Thank you.
Hey, it's JR. Before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. Are you a visionary entrepreneur who wants to elevate your brand and expand your influence to increase your impact? If this is you, you're the reason we're on a mission to amplify the voices of visionary entrepreneurs by unlocking their wisdom, sharing their stories, and publishing their books. So, when you are ready to level up your business and your life, send me a text to 832-240-1922. That's because I want to teach you to amplify your voice so that your mission and message are seen, known, and heard by those who need your help the most.